Today we're going to be learning how to crochet these super cute and beginner-friendly headbands. This project doesn't take much yarn at all and it works up super quick, so it makes a great gift. All you're going to need for this project is some worsted weight 4 acrylic yarn, a 4mm hook, and a pair of scissors. And we can go ahead and get started. To get started on our headband, we need to make a slip knot. To make a slip knot, we're going to wrap the yarn around 2 of our fingers in a cross. Pinch the yarn tail with our thumb, and then taking the pointer finger on our opposite hand, I'm putting that under that first strand of yarn and over the second. Then I'm flipping that second strand of yarn up and pulling it tight. One more time, I'm wrapping the yarn around my fingers in a cross. I'm pinching that yarn tail with my thumb. And then I'm taking my pointer finger on my right hand and I'm putting it under that first strand of yarn and over the second. Then I'm flipping that second strand of yarn up and pulling it tight to make my slip knot. Now we can go ahead and put the hook into our slip knot and pull that tight and get started on our chain. To make our chain, we're going to yarn over and just pull that directly through the loop on our hook to make one chain. Again, yarn over and pull that directly through the loop on our hook. And I'm going to go ahead and make 50 chains, and your chain is going to be the length of the tie at either side of your headband. So if you'd like a longer or shorter tie on your headband, go ahead and make a longer or shorter chain. But like I said, I'm going to go ahead and chain 50, and I will meet you back here. I've got my 50 chains here, and I'm going to go ahead and get started on row 1. And for row 1, we need to place 2 single crochets into the second chain from the hook. So this here is going to be the first chain from the hook, and this is the second chain from the hook. So we're going to place our 2 single crochets into the second chain. To make our single crochet, we're going to insert the hook into that second chain, yarn over, and pull up a loop so that you have 2 loops on your hook. Then yarn over and pull through both of those loops on the hook. So we need to place 1 more single crochet into that very same chain. So I'm going to go ahead and insert my hook back into that chain, yarn over and pull up a loop so that I have 2 loops on the hook. Yarn over and pull through both of those loops on my hook to make my second single crochet. So before every single row, we're going to chain 1 and then flip our work over so that we can work in the opposite direction that we just worked. For row 2, we need to place 2 single crochets into this first stitch here and 2 single crochets into the next stitch here. And you'll see at the top of our work we have these 2 V's, and that is the top of your single crochet stitches. We need to work under both of those V's just like this when we make our single crochets. So let's go ahead and make our first 2 single crochets. We will always skip over the chain that we made and work directly into the very first stitch. So I'm going to insert the hook into that very first stitch, yarn over and pull up a loop, yarn over and pull through 2 to make my first single crochet. I'm placing 1 more single crochet into that same space. So when you place 2 stitches into the same space, it is going to create an increase. So we're going to start widening out our headband now. So now I need to place 2 more single crochets into this next stitch. And you should have a little triangle starting to form at the end of your chain here. Let's start on row 3. And like I said, before every single row, we're going to chain 1 and flip our work over so that we can start working back down in the opposite direction. For row 3, we're going to place 2 single crochets both into this very first stitch. And then I'm placing 1 single crochet into each of the next 2 stitches. So let's make 1 single crochet into the next stitch and 1 single crochet into the next stitch. So I have 1 stitch left at the end here. and I'm going to place 2 single crochets both into that last stitch. And you can see how our triangle is starting to get wider. For row 4, again, I'm chaining 1 and flipping my work over. And again, I'm placing 2 single crochets both into that first stitch to make an increase. And then I'm going to place 1 single crochet into each one of my stitches until I again reach this very last stitch here. So let's make 1, 2, 3, and 4 single crochets. And into my very last stitch, I'm placing again 2 single crochets into that same stitch. Now I am happy with the width of my headband here, but if you'd like yours to be wider, you can do a few more increasing rows just like we just did. You're just going to add a few extra rows where you place 2 single crochets into the same space at the beginning and at the end of your row. But because I'm happy with the width of my headband here, I'm going to go ahead and start making rows without increasing. So I'm going to chain 1 and flip my work over. So for row 5, I'm going to single crochet 1 into each stitch for the entire row. I'm not making any increases. And I'm starting in that very first stitch. Just like that. Row 6 onward is going to be exactly the same as row 5. I'm chaining 1, flipping my work over, and I'm going to place 1 single crochet into each stitch for the entire row. So I'm going to go ahead and keep working rows exactly the same as row 5 until I'm happy with the length of my headband. Okay, I ended up doing 62 rows in total, and from row 5 onward, my headband measures about 14 inches. You're just going to want your headband to measure from row 5 until the last row here, from the top of one ear over your head and to the top of the other ear. So yours might be a little longer or a little shorter than mine. That is okay. Now we need to go ahead and make this side match our first side here and add this little triangle to the end. So instead of making 2 single crochets into this first stitch here, we need to make a decrease. To make a decrease, we're going to insert the hook into that very first stitch, pull up a loop like we're starting our single crochet, and then I'm putting the hook into that next stitch and pulling up another loop so that I have 3 loops on my hook, and then I'm pulling through all 3 of those loops on the hook to make my decrease. Now I'm going to single crochet 1 into each stitch until I have 2 stitches left. You can see that I have 2 stitches left at the end here. So I'm going to make my next decrease by inserting my hook into that first stitch and pulling up a loop. And I'm going into that next stitch and pulling up a loop so that I have 3 loops on the hook. And I'm pulling through all 3 of those loops on the hook to make my final decrease for this row. So you can see I have a decrease at the beginning and a decrease at the end of my row. Okay, let's chain 1 and flip our work over so we can do our next decreasing row. Again, I'm going to make a decrease at the beginning of the row by going into that first stitch and pulling up a loop. Then go into that next stitch, pull up a loop, and pull through all 3 of those loops on the hook. So now we have 2 single crochets between our last 2 stitches here. So let's place 1 single crochet into each of the next 2 stitches and make our decrease into those last 2 stitches. Just like that. Chain 1 and turn your work. Now we only have 4 stitches left in this row, so that means we're not going to have any single crochets between our decreases. So we're going to make a decrease into these first 2 stitches and our second decrease into these last 2 stitches here. There's our first one and our second one, just like that. So that was my last decreasing row. And before I make my chain to make the second tie of my headband, I'm going to chain 1, turn my work, and then I'm going to slip stitch into this stitch here, just so that my chain can come out of the middle of my work rather than coming out at the side. So now go ahead and chain however many chains you made at the beginning of your work. I made 50 chains for my first tie, so I'm going to chain 50 again. So I lost part of my video, so I'm going to go ahead and show you what this red headband that I'm making. When you get to the end of your chain, we're going to tie off by cutting our yarn. And then I'm just going to pull that yarn tail directly through that last chain that we made and pull it tight. So the last thing that we need to do is weave in these yarn tails at either side of our headband at the end of these chains. Now you can either pull these tight and just trim them down, or you can take your hook or a tapestry needle and weave it back down the chain. I'm going to go ahead and just cut mine because you're not going to see them anyway, but make sure you don't cut them all the way down here because it will probably unravel. You want to leave a little bit of yarn sticking out so that it does not come undone. Okay, once you have weaved in all your yarn tails, your new headband is ready to wear.